What up, y'all? So I'm Flower Bomb, hanging out with my homie Tamba Wilde. We out in Chicago. We're going to be talking a little bit about veganism and white supremacy, anarchism, post-left, anti-left, anti-colonial, anti-civ type shit. So it's like you got two people living in the hood, right? You always hear about how, you know, veganism is a white thing, it's a racist thing, it's a colonial thing, you know, all this shit, right? All this shit. And it's like, all right, so let's hear from people who are vegan, who live in the hood, who are, you know, people of color. Let's talk about that. And that's kind of what I want to do with this. I'll start off with myself first. When I first went vegan, I was actually vegetarian because I was kind of on like a health thing, you know, trying to like be good to my body, but also I was like aware of how fast food workers were being treated and underpaid, you know, how like tomato pickers and shit were being like mistreated and shit like that. Like I had a very vague sense of how capitalism was very exploitative. And so my idea at the time was just like, all right, well, I'm gonna boycott fast food restaurants and shit like that. And I met somebody that challenged me a little bit more, you know, kind of said, you should push that analysis a little further, you know, go vegan, you know what I mean? And at the time I was real ignorant. I was real ignorant about veganism. I would say some crazy shit like, you know, oh, cows ain't got nothing going on anyways, you know, what are they gonna do, you know? Mm-hmm. And
my favorite one that I used to say was, oh, you might be vegan, but a lion wouldn't extend you that same courtesy.
Right, shit like sense, that. Right? Right, exactly. So like, because when you, especially when you're in the hood, like, you don't have access to fruits and veggies as much as you have access to like McDonald's and Burger King and shit. So that's why my mentality at the time was thinking in terms of like people, like the workers working at fast food restaurants, because that was the people that I interacted with the most, and that was like my understanding of the food industry was through those avenues. But I started looking at like, okay, so like, what about the food itself? You know what I mean? Not even just like from a health perspective, but like these beings that I used to joke about not having a life, and I thought about it in terms of like, well shit, a lot of people think people in the hood, like their lives don't matter.
Animals.
Right, our animals. Yeah, and like we ain't got no purpose in life because all we do is kill each other, you know what I mean? And I remember thinking like, well, when people think that or say that, there's an entire complex, you know, history and like reasons why we are the way we are, why we behave the way we behave, and therefore there must be something similar going on with like animals that we don't know about because we refuse to like acknowledge that they have personalities and lives of their own. In other words, they're more than just food, as much as people live in the hood are more than just fucking criminals. Right. So that was a connection I made. And going vegan itself, like really honestly, all that shit took was someone showed me some slaughterhouse videos, and it was like PETA videos and like Mercy for Animals videos and shit, and it was like these animals were just being brutalized, and I'm like this is fucked up. This happens all the time, and like nobody's doing anything about it. No one's saying anything about it. Like, well, some people are saying about it, you know, PETA folks or fucking Mercy for Animals, Vegan Outreach, like all these different animal rights groups are trying, but everyone just writes them off, you know. And I'm like, oh fuck, that was me writing these people off. Yeah. That was me being like, they out there like trying to fucking save some animals, save our food from. And I'm like, oh shit. So I got real mad. I was like, this is fucked up. Like, yeah, like, all right, show me how to do it. Like veganism, all right, that's the least I can do. The least I can do is say, no, these animals are not food. These are living beings that deserve the same fucking right and access to life that I expect for myself, but they can't do that as long as people like me are sitting there being like, no, they're food. They're there for my consumption, for my exploitation.
Right.
So all of this shit was like, all of this happened before I really became like a hardened anti-capitalist, you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
And that's part of the reason why once I started to become more of an anti-capitalist, more of like an anarchist, anti-civ, I started becoming disappointed by the fact that all these people were still consuming animals and still treating animals as if they're just objects to be consumed, when it's like, yo, we recognize criticisms of like objectifying and consuming bodies when it comes to patriarchy and sexism and misogyny, but somehow we totally ignore this happening with these animals, and it's like, why? And it's like, oh, well, is it because these animals, you know, they don't get an opportunity to go out and protest and march? They're too busy being killed in slaughterhouses and shit. So
right, well, yeah.
Right, so that's, in a nutshell, that's pretty much my story. How'd you get to?
Yeah, very similarly, you know. Well, I was already a leftist for maybe 7-8 years before I became vegan, and that's how I, you know, started interacting with vegans. Actually, you know, connecting with other activists and whatnot, and we would talk about it with each other, and they give the usual, you know, these animals are being slaughtered, and they show the slaughterhouse footage, which was fucked up to me, but coming from the hood, living in the hood currently, you know, then and now, it was sort of like, yeah, it's fucked up, but I see people getting killed right outside in front of me every day.
Right, right. Death is just the way it is. You know, that kind of mentality of like, oh, what are you going to do? That's just the way it is.
Right. And so we live fucked up lives here.
You were talking about how, like, you saw the violence all around you. So when people were like, oh, there's violence against animals, the first thing that came to your head was, well, shit, there's violence all around me. What's the difference?
Right, exactly. And, well, I contextualized it in a frame of being black. You know, it's happening to black people, not just violence all around, even though it is specifically black people in the hood in my situation. And, you know, still being a leftist, just reading different theory and literature. I was reading Murray Bookchin, The Ecology of Freedom. And it's not even about veganism or animals, but it's sort of about human domination and how that came to be. And in reading that, I just was able to finally make the link that, hey, you know, this is where this started. This is where, you know, they got the idea that black people were less than human, we're animals. And, you know, that was, I finally connected. I finally made the link. And the next day I went vegan.
Right, word. You know, and that's honestly all it is acknowledging that the oppression that happens with non-human animals it's not like different than what happens with us. It's all part of the same system. And where people...
And literally based and modeled on what they did to animals, they literally took that and applied it to humans.
Right. Like animals have always been the lowest common denominator, not only in terms of being compared or people being compared to animals as a way of degradation, but animals have always been like the testing subjects for a lot of like technological infrastructure, a lot of industrial infrastructure, a lot of pharmaceuticals and shit. Like animals are always, because they're reduced, their personalities are totally disregarded. Like their entire existence is just seen as an object to fuck around with.
Another commodity.
A commodity. Yeah, and that's exactly that's exactly what I saw self-identifying anarchists perpetuating in their own decisions and their own lifestyles and their own choices in their own like rhetoric, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know how I got so fucking sick of seeing anarchist propaganda with like pigs dressed up as cops.
Yeah.
And these motherfuckers think that shit is limited to symbolism, and it's like, no, we've seen people actually show up to demonstrations with pigs' heads cut off, pigs' bodies being cooked and shit like that. Like, there is material repercussions for that symbolism.
Yeah.
Not to mention...
It's also a backwards symbolism.
Right.
No pig has ever hurt you.
For real. Like, you know what I'm saying?
No pig has ever oppressed you.
What pig has pulled a gun out and shot you for breaking a fucking law? You know what I'm saying? If anything, we should be the cops to the pigs.
Right.
Because we're the ones going to the pigs, fucking destroying and killing them, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, symbolism and shit. But I saw this being perpetuated heavily within the radical community, and I couldn't just not say anything. That's the thing, right? Like, we can get in the streets and we can challenge the police, we can challenge capitalists, we can challenge fascists, you know, all that shit. And however we want to define challenge, you know, we could destroy, we could fight, we could, you know, sabotage. But then when it comes to me merely opening my mouth about veganism, all of a sudden these motherfuckers get all up in arms and everyone's like, oh, you're policing my diet, like all this bullshit. And it's like, ain't nobody putting a gun to your head. Only thing I'm doing is I'm poking holes in human supremacist logic. And that makes motherfuckers uncomfortable. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's beyond choices. It's beyond, like, you know, dietary choice. Like, when do we get to have a choice to decide somebody's life? And how the fuck are you going to claim that that's not authoritarian?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I want to go back a little bit to when we were talking about, when I was saying that I had made the link between animals and black people oppression and whatnot. And I want to bring up the whole concept of animality in and of itself. It is what is an animal? What do you think of when you hear that word?
Mm-hmm.
In indigenous societies around the world, in their languages, there's traditionally no word for animal. A lion may be a lion, a bird is a bird, whatever, but there's no concept as animal. So yeah. What does that specific, what is that specific classification, that construct of animal meant to be?
A division between two animals, a division between a civilized higher animal
Human.
and we call that a human and then an animal, but really two are one and the same. It's just that arbitrary division that we've created because we are no longer interactive with nature. We create animal as a way of creating an other.
Right.
That's what you're trying to say.
Yes. Animals were sort of the first of the.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole concept of it is based outright on a hierarchy. There's humans and then there's animals. So
right, that's a really good point. See, that stuff a lot of people don't really think about. They don't really think about the fact that the word itself, animal, has been used as a way to other those beings that have been designated as food or subjects for, you know, industrial experimentation or like dietary consumption, like animal. We eat animals. What do you mean we eat animals? We are animals. We eat each other? No, we don't ever talk about cannibalism unless it's some sort of like tragic circumstance. So when someone says we eat animals, you mean we animals eat animals? Like,
well, you know, talking about that, you know, historically, some white people did eat black people,
right,
in the beginning of colonization,
right.
You know, considering us less than human, and as animals, they really everything that happens to animals today did happen to black people as well in the past. Right. Medical experimentation, you know, testing for drugs and disease, all of it. Zoos,
Right.
all of it.
Right.
So
That's always the baseline.
it's very much a connected thing. So when people say that, veganism is a white thing, as if altruism to everyone and not harming people is a white thing. Like historically, it doesn't even. Anyway, so
it don't make sense.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It don't make sense.
it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
It doesn't make sense. So then, so let me touch on some, because I know there's people out there that love. It seems to me like anarchists only give a fuck about indigenous people, First Nations people. When it comes to veganism, all of a sudden everyone wants to be like, oh yeah, we support and we love and we support. It's like, you weren't saying that shit when you're trying to fucking build communes and fucking build fucking cities on the same land that was stolen from them. But now all of a sudden when we talk about this, now all of a sudden you care about indigenous people didn't do this. But the problem is, a lot of indigenous people were vegetarian and vegan.
Vegans are colonialists,
Right?
But Taco Bell, fucking isn't like
Right. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like McDonald's, Burger King. It's like, oh, vegans are colonial. But you go to Burger King, you go to McDonald's, you go to the grocery store to purchase these big packages of meat from slaughterhouses that were built and made and function on colonial land. You know what I'm saying? Like. But that's not even the shit that gets me. The shit that gets me is when they try to use identity as a way to shut down dialogue. When they try to use but native people, and then actual native vegans get on there and are like, actually no, and then they just shut down the whole conversation. They just walk away and ignore it. So one of the things what I'm trying to say is I can't stand how people use indigenous people as a tool, as a tool to perpetuate their own human supremacy. We could just talk about the fact that animals are being fucked up and mutilated, and consuming them, perpetuating that shit financially, economically, socially, in every level is fucking authoritarian. We could keep focused on that, but rather than people admit that their ideological commitments to anti-civ or becoming animal or whatever it is, they refuse to accept and admit that their shit is hypocrisy. Yeah. That they are logically and practically and lifestyle inconsistent with the shit that they talk about. You know what I'm saying?
That's why they get so hostile towards us. And,
right.
No one wants to confront their cognitive dissonance.
Right.
So a lot of people would say that the existence of, or the continued existence of institutional racism is a reason not to focus on the suffering of non-human animals, because how can you focus on animals when people are still being oppressed?
I mean, shit, the fact...
About that?
Well, the fact is, you can do both. You don't have to choose one, because it's not just one that exists in society.
As I was saying earlier, with the whole linking the two, seeing that they're linked together, you cannot get rid of one. In my opinion, you can't get rid of one without the other.
Right. That's what I'm saying. You can't, because they're... And the thing about civilization and industrial society is that we've been conditioned to look at things in a very mechanistic way. We look at things like things are separated parts, and that there's very simple solutions to very complex problems. But the fact is, we acknowledge that there is overlap with all of these different forms of oppression. Nobody's denying that. What I'm advocating for is total liberation, acknowledging that they all exist and resisting all of these things by existing as insubordinate to participating and perpetuating these things.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I'm not going up to non-vegans and putting a gun to their head and being like, go vegan because you call yourself an anarchist. What I want people to be open about is the fact that when you go out and you claim to be an anarchist or an anti-authoritarian while also arguing against vegans and telling vegans that they're racist or colonial or ableist or any of that shit, I want it in their face that this is a hypocrisy. This is an inconsistency, you know?
It's also inconsistent to, say you're against hierarchy and supremacism and then turn around and say, well, animals aren't as smart as us.
Right. Right. I want to demand honesty from these hypocritical anti-authoritarians. I will be honest and say there are vegans out there who do not apply an anti-capitalist or anti-civ lens.
Or anti-racist, or there are racist vegans, there's sexist vegans.
Right. There's vegans of all stripes, because that's like the inverse of what we're talking about. We're talking about anti-authoritarians who are anti-racist, anti-sexist, all that shit, but then like totally okay with oppressing animals. The reality is, there is also vegans who are, they don't give a fuck about racism, sexism, and any of that. They give a fuck about animals, and that's it. And that's wonderful, right, for the animals, but it's like, you gotta expand that shit outward. Like, recognize that in order to be vegan, in order to really like perpetuate or like propagate veganism, you at the very least have to acknowledge that everything about industrial society is anti-animal. Like,
anti-animals, anti-nature.
Right, anti-nature, like highways, all that shit, like, it is death by design to the wild around us. And every time we expand our own human interests in terms of like infrastructure, profit and shit like that, like, we take more and more away from these non-human animals. So that is where I draw the connection between being vegan and being anti-civ.
Yeah, me too. That's actually how, I was aware of anti-civ viewpoints and had some anti-civ friends. Will Floyd, you're out there. A bunch of others too. Some have dead now. Anyway.
Right. But you made connections.
So I was aware of the anti-civ thing, and I didn't jive with it. Honestly, I didn't see any problem with civilization. I just saw it as a state issue, that it was a problem with states. That's why I was an anarchist. And anyway, with going vegan, if you're like me, you continue to study things and try to get to the bottom of them, you eventually get into ecology and like understanding ecology and finally making the connection that, hey, every time a new highway is built, a new factory built, we're, taking away land from animals, disrupting entire ecosystems, decimating them. And so veganism was actually my path to accepting an anti-civ sort of framework.
Right, because I used to be a leftist. Like, when I first went vegan, I was a leftist. I was an anarchist communist, and at that time I was under the idea that, well, if we can topple capitalism, if we can topple the state, we can create another society that's more egalitarian and can be respectful to animals. But what I was not thinking about at the time is that anytime humans occupy large swaths of land in order to accommodate a population of people, in other words, we're talking communism, socialism, like mass populations.
Mass society.
Right, we are disrupting those like natural organic life cycles that are like elemental to the earth, living and thriving, and to other animals living and thriving, and we don't need to do that. You know what I mean? Like, we don't need to just conquer and destroy large swaths of land in order to survive. As a matter of fact, we know, that we can survive, we can learn to forage, we could get in the woods. We could allow woods to be grown. We could allow the earth to really flourish, and we could live with it. Because the problem is, we thought that we were on top of it all. We thought that we were like this superior being.
Supremacy.
Right. And we are realizing more and more how much of a joke human supremacy is. Like, the joke's on us. We thought we could build big cities and highways and drive electric cars and shit, only to realize that eventually the earth is going to crumble. Like, not the earth itself, but our infrastructure. The life forces that we rely on to survive, we're killing.
Exactly.
Taking more from the land than putting back.
Exactly.
And it's funny to me how, for as anti-Christian leftist claim to be, the humanism that they uphold is very much
rooted
is very much rooted in the biblical language. I mean, God says that the human species is the chosen one.
Right.
That we have mastery and dominion over the earth, and it's ours to do whatever we please with.
Yep.
Right.
And leftists just perpetuate that.
These are good words. His homie's off screen, but this is Morgan Taylor, y'all. Y'all better watch it. That's another individualist, nihilist vegan over here writing up some shit. What other myths, what other shit do you think people try to come up with in order to not be vegan? Like, what is the thing? Like, people probably wonder, like, okay, these two are in the hood. How can they afford all that bougie vegan food? And it's like, yo, beans and rice, fucking fruit and vegetables. You live in the hood. You've been, Sundays, the fucking street vendors and shit everywhere. That's easy food. That's easy vegan food. And I'm not talking about all the meat products and shit like that. I'm talking about the healthy, good fruit and veggies. You can't say that shit is inaccessible because vendors have been living in the hood, come out, they got their own little ways of getting their like fruits and veggies and shit. That shit has been accessible for years and years and years. You know what I'm saying? Like, it really just boils down to, are you determined to do it? I never had a problem going vegan. There was never a food issue for me going vegan because I made it a thing to try to figure out where to get that food. And I'm not saying it's always like, yeah, you're not going to see Whole Foods in a hood. You're not going to see that unless it's being gentrified. And by that point, us motherfuckers are already gone because we can't afford it. But like, usually there is a bodegas with bananas, fruit, rice, beans, canned vegetables, canned fruit, something. It is possible, and this shit's healthier too anyways. Yeah. I mean, you talking about like, oh yeah, vegan food is inaccessible or unhealthy. It's like, well, what about McDonald's and Burger King? That shit is worse. Just because it's affordable don't mean it's fucking good. But, whatever.
And in fact, that stuff, McDonald's, the cheaper it is, the worse it is for your body.
Right, you know what I'm saying? It's a low cost for a high price. You know what I'm saying? The price of these lives that are being mutilated and destroyed and slaughterhouses. I mean, just everything about consuming meat and dairy. It's fucked up.
Another argument I've heard is that becoming vegan means no longer having access to like black cultural foods.
Oh no, that's completely bullshit. First of all, there's in America the fastest growing vegan or plant-based population is black people. And they're all around. Even in the hood, there's tons of restaurants recreating all the staples that we love from our culture, and they're just veganizing them. And it's fucking good shit. You're missing out not trying it.
Right.
I've heard the same thing many times, as a Hispanic person, saying like, oh, well, if you go vegan as a Hispanic person, you can't eat Mexican food anymore. And I'm like, half of what we eat is beans and rice and tortillas, which are all very vegan.
Right. No, so one of the first things that I tackled when I first went vegan was like talking about like soul food. And yeah, there is a lot of there are traditional black cultural foods that are very like high meat and dairy and shit, but black people are not fixed in place. We learn, we grow, we evolve. You know what I'm saying? Some people like to preserve those cultures and those traditions. I'm not a fan of it because I don't believe in preserving bullshit. And what I mean by bullshit is, like, if you look at chitlins, if you look at traditional soul food, that shit was all table scraps fed to indentured servants, slaves, and shit.
It's a very much colonized diet.
Right, it's a very colonized diet, and I don't believe in preserving that. I believe in learning to decolonize the diet and like go toward things that are more like healthy, more empowering. To me, culture can be detrimental to individual growth if that culture is only preserving something that is inherently authoritarian or oppressive. For me, whether it's black culture, brown culture,
cultures change through individuals.
Right, exactly. That's the whole thing. That's what I try to tell people. Cultures don't control individuals. Individuals create cultures. And so if we realize as individuals over time that maybe shit that we thought was a good idea back then is not really a good idea now, we can change
people
that.
like us who have to be those individuals to speak to everyone else who
Right.
gets that into the culture and changes it.
I do believe that individuals can make change in the world. You know what I'm saying? Like, I recognize that, like, in the grand scheme of things don't have any inherent meaning or universal truth one way or another, but what I do know is that individuals can make impacts, can change things, because that's everything that we have, all the hierarchies, all the supremacist ideologies, these all started on an individual level and became what they are through massification. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I do think individuals do have the power to make that change. And for anybody to say that going vegan isn't going to change anything, that's just bullshit. You know?
Completely. Completely. I mean, you could say that about anything, right? Like,
Right.
You could say that about being a Marxist. You could say that about being an anarchist, you know. That, you know, just me going out and protesting, that's not going to change anything. And you may not be true, but you got to try, right?
Right. I mean, that's the thing, right? If you don't try, if you don't go out there and do anything, you never really know for sure. You just end up in a circle of making assumptions. I don't like to make assumptions. I like to get out and try things. I like to run my mouth. I like to challenge people. I like to try new things. And one of those new things that I'm learning from is how much of an impact me just running my mouth makes. I got enemies, and I also got people that are like, damn, you know, if I wouldn't have read your writing, or if I wouldn't have, you know, listened to you ramble on about some shit, I wouldn't have been able to, like, think about this shit without an external influence, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what we do, you know what I mean?
You never know, like, what you say that might click with someone later on in their lives either. You know, like, there's been plenty of times in my, you know, ideological political growth that I realized that something or another that I heard or read from someone else years ago now makes sense to me as I learn
Right.
more. And so, yeah, you never know.
It takes experience, just experiencing things, you know, getting out there, talking with people, trying to experience as much as possible in order to soak up more understanding of how things work in the world, you know? And yeah, you know, sometimes individuals can make impacts, sometimes they can't. But I think every individual to some degree makes an impact. I know that I can't say that all of my ideas on nihilism, individualism, or anarchism, or being vegan, I can't say that that was all me. That was drawn from a lot of conversations I've had over the years with a lot of different people.
Who had conversations with a lot of different people.
Right.
Who had conversations with a lot of different people. It
Right.
all builds
Right.
upon individuals.
Right. So that's what we're trying to do with making this video and having these conversations with people, is we're trying to expand that. You know, we're not gonna be, you know, scared off by people being like, oh, y'all are vegan police or anything like that. No, go ahead, call us the vegan police, call us all this bullshit. Go ahead and keep showing to the world and showing to us that at the end of the day, you just prefer to remain ignorant of reality, ignorant of complex realities, you know?
But where do y'all get your protein?
Slaughter carnes. Eat 'em. Alright, that's all, y'all.